So ADHD and autism are kind of opposites, right? If you have both, they would cancel each other out. After all, autistic people are introverted and organised, and ADHD people are extroverted and disorganised. So if you have both, you would just be normal again, right? Wrong. While these stereotypes of both conditions appear to be opposite, the reality is so much more complicated than that. So let's break it down and discover what autism and ADHD combined is actually like. Hi, I'm Phil, a very late diagnosed autistic ADHD adult, and it's my goal to advocate for other neurodivergent adults by sharing positive information and personal experiences. In part 1 of this ADHD and autism series, we looked at what ADHD is. This time I want to dive into how an autistic person who also has ADHD might experience the world when both these seemingly opposite neurodivergences are firing at the same time. Okay, so first up, let's define a new term, and that is AuDHD. This is the combination of both autism and ADHD. Now, while the term AuDHD is not an official diagnosis or even an official term, it is gaining much wider acceptance in describing those of us who experience both autism and ADHD. Up until 2013, it was not even possible to get a dual diagnosis of autism and ADHD, as the two conditions were considered to be opposites. But thankfully, that has since changed. And I say thankfully, as the combination of these two seemingly opposite conditions does not mean one cancels out the other, but more that they may fight each other or at least interact in complex ways. For example, autistic people may not want to socialise because of the overwhelm that being with a group of people might cause, but an ADHD person might crave social interaction because of a need for stimulation. But the reality is, even in this limited example, that the ADHD person may also find social interaction difficult due to issues with impulse control. So even though both conditions might appear opposites, those opposites don't have the same outcomes or neatly fall on a single-dimensional plane. In other words, if we put it in nerdy maths, it's not just a case of x equals 1 plus minus 1 equals 0, or autism plus ADHD equals no net effect. It would be more like a complex number, where z equals 1 plus I. In complex mathematics, I equals the square root of minus 1, which in itself is impossible, but represents an imaginary number and is a mathematical tool used to describe a higher dimensional plane. This is kind of like an XY graph. The standard number line is a one-dimensional plane stretching from minus infinity to plus infinity, whereas a complex number adds a second dimension. So instead of a straight one-dimensional line, we have a two-dimensional plane. Z equals x plus iy. In this analogy, we have our autistic traits represented on the x-axis and our ADHD traits represented on the y-axis. The result is a combination of traits leading to complex outcomes that don't fit neatly into either axis. Now, I could have just described this as a graph with autism on the x-axis and ADHD on the y-axis, but I kind of like the complex number analogy as it emphasises the complexity that having both conditions creates. Okay, nerdy mathematics analogy done. So what might this combination of traits look like for an AuDHD person? Well, some of our autistic and ADHD traits might fight each other. So one day we might crave social interaction and activity, while on another day we might need to avoid them. For me, a key example of this is when I do the weekly grocery shopping. Either autism or ADHD might be dominant that day. If autism is dominant, I will systematically go through the shop, checking in a repeated, ritualistic order the whole shop aisle by aisle. If I have a list, I will have it written in the order of the shop and check it off diligently as I go. If ADHD is dominant that day, I will rush through the list, skipping aisles as I go. The result is that I often skip through the list and frequently miss line items. I may even run up and down the aisles with my trolley. Either way, I shop at odd times that are quiet. For my autism, this means less people to deal with, less noise and less distraction. I can go through the checkout without other people around. For my ADHD, it means I can go as fast as possible without other people slowing me down and avoid the need to queue at the checkout. In and out ASAP. Either way, I wear earplugs so as to stay calm and in my own world. When I shop at normal times, I get told tersely by other shoppers to slow down. Similar to this is that autism often wants things to remain the same and resists change, but ADHD gets bored with sameness and wants new things. When it comes to meeting people, this can be extremely difficult, as the autistic version of me does not want to meet or interact with anyone new, but the ADHD version of me needs these new interactions. So if the autistic part is in control, the ADHD part is understimulated, and this can cause internal tension. But if the ADHD part is in control, this can cause overstimulation to the autistic part, leading to meltdowns, shutdowns, or even burnout. The other aspect to this is we never know which version of ourselves will be present in the moment. This can lead to inconsistency, emotional responses that don't match the moment, the need to rethink everything, not knowing if you're introverted or extroverted. Some people might be absolutely drawn to you, but others might actually be repelled by you. Being with other people might feel energizing, but cause a crash later. Rest feels like you are not achieving, and when you do rest, you might always be planning, reviewing, scripting, or rehearsing conversations. We may create routines, but then get bored with those routines and change them. Or crave routine, but also need spontaneity. Maybe we are a meticulous planner, autism, but have poor organisation or follow-through, ADHD. We may have high attention to detail, autism, but then make careless mistakes, ADHD. We may have acute sensory sensitivities, autism, but also need sensory stimulation, both autism and ADHD. We may be strongly analytical in our thinking, autism, but also highly lateral and associative, ADHD. A sound or texture that we loved yesterday might feel awful today. And as a result of all of these traits, and because of years of experiencing failure or rejection, we may tend to blame ourselves first for everything that does not go right. Another key risk for AuDHD people is that we might get missed in terms of diagnosis, because the presentation of these combined ADHD and autistic traits on the outside might not fall into the stereotypical presentation of either condition. This is where the false narrative of ADHD cancelling out autism can come in. From the outside, this may look to be the case, but on the inside, the complex interaction of these traits makes life complicated and difficult. So if people say to you, "You don't look autistic," or "You're not autistic," or even "You must be very high functioning," when you disclose your autism, just maybe ADHD might also be present, hiding from the outside world the very real struggles you experience. This hiding of traits is only external. It does not make them any less impactful to your life's experience. And as I mentioned, this can mean both conditions might be denied in a diagnosis if the professional is not expert in how autism and ADHD interact. This might mean that either the traits may seem to cancel each other out, or maybe all the traits get lumped into either one of autism or ADHD, while the other gets missed entirely. Added to this is the fact that we have spent a lifetime not only masking our autism, but also masking and compensating for our ADHD. So it may be natural to continue masking unknowingly during an assessment, making the diagnosis more difficult to obtain. In my case, during my autism assessment, my psychologist identified many traits that were likely ADHD instead of, or as well as, autism. So instead of assuming that those things were not autistic, therefore I was not autistic, she used her knowledge and skill to pick that apart and realised that those apparent opposites meant there was likely ADHD as well as autism, not just less autism. And likewise, this combination of traits may influence the results of ADHD-specific psychometric tests, as they are designed to identify ADHD in isolation. There are also many implications of living with both autism and ADHD. People with both autism and ADHD need to develop a more complex set of compensatory skills. In autism, this may look like extensive planning, strict routines, and avoiding sensory triggers. ADHD also may add in sensory challenges, including the inability to filter out background noise, leading to physical or emotional reactions to sounds others don't notice. Both autism and ADHD cause executive functioning challenges. In autism, that may look like being inflexible or having rigid routines, while in ADHD, it could look like planning, organisation, or focus challenges. Likewise, emotional regulation differences may include a lack of understanding of emotions in autism, which is also known as alexithymia, or emotional impulsivity in ADHD. These factors combined might mean our emotional responses don't align with the moment, or might seem out of context or disproportional in either direction. And all these competing challenges mean the AuDHD individual faces a higher cognitive load, reduced energy, and even burnout. In autism, we often talk about special interests. In AuDHDers, these special interests will likely still be present, but there may be more, or they may be more transient as we move on to the next thing, as our ADHD pushes for new things. All of this means we may find ourselves rethinking everything as our brain constantly wrestles with executive functioning issues, sensory overstimulation, and the processing of interactions, emotions, and our environment. And these things may also mean our nervous system does not filter things predictably. This nervous system dysregulation can lead to physical symptoms like heart palpitations, digestive issues, chronic pain, sleep disturbances, fatigue, dizziness, sweating, muscle tension, or tremors. One further implication of living with both is that AuDHDers are more likely to experience mental health-related conditions like depression and anxiety than those with either condition separately. Okay, so there we have it, a brief introduction to what it may be like to have both autism and ADHD. As always, please feel free to share your own experiences of being autistic and ADHD in the comments section. And please like, subscribe, and share for more experiences from an older autistic bloke. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye for now.